know just the situation really since March, but I think it's interesting to start looking a little bit about what might happen next and what could be some sort of vision that comes out of the next few days also. Being honest with you, let's try to understand where are we today. So if I take some analysis here from OAG, what they are predicting is that by the end of this month, world aviation will see capacity probably around 50% of where it should be on the global scale. So the effect of this pandemic is obviously a worry in the fact that many airlines were hoping that come the summer, things would have been improved. And as you can see here, we actually started to get to a position where during the period of summer that there seemed to be a slight pickup. But what we're now seeing is this kind of month on month of airlines starting to really think, how can we redesign our network planning based more on the fact that where is the demand at the moment? So the challenge that we're all suggesting is, of course, capacity and the ability to put capacity back in the market. But actually, are we finding then that the consumer, the traveler, is willing to take that approach? And of course, more and more lockdowns have been put in position. I'm talking to you today from Lisbon, over on the west of Europe. Yesterday, we put more measures in position to stop our pandemic. So you can start to see that many countries now are really seeing this second wave, and what impact will that have as we move into winter. The next slide is coming from ICAO, and interestingly here, they started to think about all of these different terms that people have mentioned with the scenarios of U curves, L curves, W curves. We've even got the Nike swoosh curve that has been put in position. If we look at what I've just highlighted from OAG, probably what's likely to be happening is that in the next 6 months, we probably will follow this L-shaped path where we will continue to be about 50% down on the capacity. Some even might think it might come down a little bit. It might even get a little bit worse than the L-shaped. But I think, being as honest as I can, I don't think we will be better than the L-shaped response. So I think what that then says is that there was some optimism back in August that maybe we actually start to take a more sustainable approach. But I think what we've seen since this second wave that's really hit Europe in a major way, and obviously the US, as we know, hasn't really made any additions, in that each month it's getting worse and worse. There seems to be a reality that we might be facing this, what we could call an L-shaped project, where we just keep running as is. And maybe the new normal in the next 6 months, even 1 year from now, is around 50%. So let's try to understand that the realities of where we are today is on the basis that we need to think again about where we come and where we go next. So what's the drivers of this? I think immediately what have airlines done since we reopened most of the aviation in April and May was to find money. Cash flow was obviously becoming a problem. So immediately there was a need for subsidies. How can airlines access money to be able to support their opportunities and try to fly where there was some domestic demand, where there was some repatriation demand, and obviously to think about how cargo could become more important for a traditional scheduled airline company. That subsidies then moved into more financial aid. So governments were really encouraged where they had major airline assets to be involved. There was obviously some concerns with this. Is it correct that governments should be providing loans or guarantees to companies? But of course, what we've seen in the world, most governments did what they could. We're now at the stage of what's next. If you've been following the United States, they had this project called the CARES Act that actually stopped at the end of last week. And there is a real worry now that the US government is not really saying whether or not they will continue to provide aid to the major US airline companies. It's still being debated in the House of Representatives to define what that will look like. In Europe, it was quite clear the big airline groups were supported. And the third action was obviously commercial airlines started to say, where can we reduce costs? And of course, that you start to renegotiate with your owners, your lessors. You actually start to look at, can you defer any taxes that you owe back to the governments? And of course, the next phase is to start talking to the airports about the ability to pay taxes and how do we try to ensure that we support the development of what we can, but also realize that with less passengers, we have less to be able to support our partners. So immediately what happened, what we're going to now get into are what I'm going to call the 3 R's. How do we resolve this situation? What I've shown you with OAG, what I've shown you with ICAO, we're talking maybe about a period of at least 6 months where we will have capacity levels minimum of 50% on the norms. Some say that will get higher as we move into the Northern Hemisphere's winter. So we realize that how can we think about resolving the problem during the next 6 to 8 months? There's some perception that come the IR summer 21 April period, that there may be a bounce effect because we're moving into that summer opportunity. We just don't know. But this time we've got to resolve. And then we need to think about being in a position to return to what we want to think about. One of the challenges that this pandemic has thrown up to the business of airlines and the business of many organizations is a very interesting concept that we try to understand. How do you manage adversity? The term adversity means when things change rapidly. Now, are we saying that the pandemic is an adverse situation? Is it going to be that when there is a vaccine, that we will go back to the figures of 2019? Or will there be a new model? Because one thing is to return in the new normal, the other thing is to return back to what we used to do. And these are the real interesting questions that academics and consultants would like to put to the table, because we've never had this before. We've managed adverse times, and to manage adversity, reduce costs, rethink the vision, and restart again. What this pandemic is highlighting is that maybe the restart, the return to aviation, could be very different. And can we take that decision to return with a different approach? Because if we go back to what we were doing in 2019, in 2021 or 2022, will that work? Has this pandemic changed the mind of the prospect? The prospect being the person that might buy travel. Because that has to be thought. We're running this event that I presume, Elizabeth, is normally done in a wonderful setting in Ghana where people get together and there's a real camaraderie of spirit and dynamism. We're now in this virtual world. Has this taught us something? Do we want this, or do we want to go back to the good old days? These are questions that we can't answer, but it's important that the industry, all industries, think about the return, not returning back to where we came from, because that's like saying we've ignored the last 9 months, plus the next 6 months that we're likely to have. So that's like saying, let's ignore 15 months of what's just happened and go back to the great days of 2019. Has the world evolved that we'll never go back to 2019 with the way that we were doing things? And we need a new vision for 21 and beyond that we still don't know. And that's part of the third R, which I'll use this word of reform, trying to look and be a little bit bullish about where you want to be. Because as everybody's been saying, in the time that we've had in these last 6 months, people have had a little bit of opportunity to understand what could be. So let's try to think about where we might be in 5 years. So the 3 R's are what we're now going to look at for the next 15, 20 minutes. How to resolve the situation, understand this survival mode, consider the move to returning to something we don't know yet, but let's try and understand what we need to build. And then let's take that crystal ball concept and think about what next. How do we see our industry 5 years from now? And that's something that maybe in this resolve situation, we're not thinking about the future. We're thinking about, will we survive next week? So, of course, this brings planning and strategy to another level. Years ago, there was a wonderful piece of work coming out of INSEAD in France. It was something called Blue Ocean strategy. Those of you living in Ghana, I'm living here on the Atlantic coast in Portugal. I can look out and I see the blue ocean. It's beautiful today. We're about 27 degrees and I can see the ocean, but I don't know what's at the end of that ocean. The great discoverers of Portugal and the great discoverers of the United Kingdom, etc., they realized that at the end of that blue ocean, we didn't fall off the cliff. They realized that something was out there. And these INSEAD professors came up with this concept of how do you build strategy only thinking about tomorrow? Don't think about where you've come from. If you go to a bank and ask for money to develop a business plan, they'll ask you very simply for a strategic document that will ask you, where are we now and where do you want to be? Where are we now and where do you want to be? Well, I've absolutely no idea where we are now. And I've got no idea where I might be, but I think I have an idea. You could imagine talking to a financial banking person with that philosophy. They'll say, thank you very much. Please go to talk to one of my competitors. There's no project. But Blue Ocean said, why talk about yesterday? Yesterday was fantastic. Yesterday was 2019. We were all fat. We were sitting there with everything great. The world was brilliant. Everybody was traveling. Everybody was traveling for leisure, for business, and airlines were growing. The manufacturers were building new aircraft, and boom, something happened. And we're now talking, can we go back there? Is it time to think about Blue Ocean? How do we take these visionary concepts of thinking about tomorrow and apply it to our industry? Because this was an industry that led the way for many years. This was an industry that the people looked up to. Aviation pioneered globalization. And if we look in the last period, it seems to be what we're doing is taking away what was innovative. I was fortunate and thank you to the Master of Ceremonies in that explanation. I was fortunate enough to be part of an organization that flew Concorde and actually went to New York and arrived before I left London. I don't see Concorde flying today. Have we gone backwards? I was fortunate enough to travel on the 747 and be upstairs. And as you probably saw last week, British Airways took their last 747s out of service, mirroring what has already happened by KLM, etc. that was a pioneering aircraft in the 70s, Concorde in the 70s as well. Have we gone backwards in relation to innovation? And how do we think about the future? Is there an alternative to flying? Well, many people talked about video conferencing, and look at 2019. Airlines were the best year ever. And we had all the video conferencing platforms that we have today, we just weren't using them. So there was this perception that everybody was going to be using platforms for communication. They've been talking about this since we launched the fax machine. Oh, business travel is dead. Everybody will be using technology. And as I said, in 2019, best year ever for aviation. 2020, the world changed. Are we prepared to stay like this, how we are today? Or will we go back to what we did in the past? We have to think blue ocean. So I'm going to just take a small brief, and if there are any people online that would like to ask anything, suggest anything, I'm here to listen, and then we'll go through each of these 3 R's in a little bit more detail. But I'll just take any, if there's anybody who wants to open their microphone, say hello, ask me anything, or highlight anything that we've just been mentioning. This is a class for us to try to think about where we go together. If anybody wants to, or if there's any questions, please go on to any of the processes that we have.
Okay, thank you, Gavin.
No, we'll continue. We're not finished. It's just we're just taking a couple of minutes to see if there's any questions or.
Okay, so to our participants, if you have a question, kindly put it in the Q&A, or you can raise up your hand and then you'll be unmuted, so you can ask your question. You can put your questions in the Q&A, or you can raise your hand up and you'll be unmuted to ask your question. Thank you very much.
Let's just give them a, okay, there's a question coming in, so I'm going. Thank you, Andrew. How long will this crisis last? I think if I showed you, if you were with us, and I think yes, because you have been on, I think the ICAO curves were interesting in what they were showing, that I think a lot of people felt that the end of, or by Christmas, maybe the worst was behind us. And I think if we look at what happened then in July and August, particularly here in Europe, I'm not sure where you're based, but here in Europe, I think what happened in July and August is, as you probably, if you're in or you would have been reading, is that we made a big push for what was the last part of summer. And I think that we're now paying for that, being in an open forum. I think there's a belief that we opened, people traveled, and of course we've hit this significant second spike. And if you look at some of the numbers coming from the health ministries, whether or not it's because we're doing more testing now than we were doing back in April and May, but in most cases, the R number and the graphical numbers are much higher than we've ever seen. And I'm talking about Spain, Portugal, UK, France, Germany as being the barometers of that. So I think, you know, putting that, we're no way going to be the positivity of ICAO in some of those curves that come Christmas, things will be okay. Hence why if we take the vision of what OAG was saying, it's likely to be that this winter, it won't move anywhere above that 50% capacity level. So we're kind of in it now until I think probably through to April, March, April. It's then what happens as we go back into our, what we could call European winter, from winter to summer, what might happen with the US. Obviously the US with the domestic, and China, as you've been knowing, with the domestic project, and that's what we're going to talk tomorrow for Ghana. You know, capacities is, there's slides coming out on webinars that the China week, they've just gone through their golden week last week. The levels of travel last week in China were higher than the same period in 2019. So, you know, that not international, within the domestic market. So how long does this crisis last? We just don't know. And I think we all thought that, you know, August and July, August, when we could travel, of course, in a controlled way, masks, social distancing, etc. I think we all thought that maybe we can control this, but I think it's proving that it's not as easy as that. So I think now that's causing airlines to have to think again, which we'll now discuss within the resolve of the first hour. So thank you for your question. Hope that kind of answered. If anybody else, Elizabeth, if you can just check while I'm getting myself ready to restart. Is there any other questions, or should I move to then talk a little bit about the 3 R's?
I think you should move.
Okay, I'm moving. So, survival. How does an airline survive the next 6 months? I've shown you in the slide a little bit earlier that they've had the bailout. The bailouts have been given. The subsidies have been given. Negotiations have happened with the airports. Money has been provided where it can. Has enough been provided? That's another question. So I think this first R about survival, I think the first thing is to say, you can't give up. You know, tough times, adversity makes the best try harder. This is a time for airlines and those organizations connected with the wider air industry. It's time to think about what we can do strategically. Which routes, which markets? It's as much as micromanaging a strategy, which no business school will ever tell you. If you think about those doing MBAs, those who've done MBAs, we don't talk about micromanagement. We talk about big picture, vision, where are we? In a survival mode, it's about where can I find my next dinner, my next drink. From an airline's point of view, are there any opportunities to think about where could we take a quick decision? We need to be nimble and be flexible. And we use this analogy of, is the aviation industry a little bit traditional? Is it easy for airlines to pick up their network and move things around? We saw it in Europe in July, when a lot of the governments opened up the European airspace. Who moved quickly was what we call the low-cost airlines, Ryanair, EasyJet, Wizz Air. They were able to get their crews back and they started to fly around point-to-point projects where there was potential availability. The larger airlines, the British Airways, the Lufthansas, the Air Frances, they were a little bit difficult because America wasn't open, China wasn't open, but Europe was. But we don't think about Paris, London, Frankfurt as flights just between Frankfurt and London, or Paris and Frankfurt. We think about Beijing, New York, via Frankfurt, via London. And those projects were not there. So those big airlines couldn't really restart, but the low cost could. And so the nimbleness of being low cost and that ability not to have to rely on multiple models coming together to allow the airline to continue is an interesting analogy about where we go in the return. What is the future of the hub? And I'm sure some of you have been on webinars where that has been discussed. Is it, what is the future of the hub because the passenger doesn't want to go through multiple airports? Or is it because the airlines cannot make that hub project in the next period when we don't have complete open borders in a global travel marketplace? So to survive, it's about nimble, about looking quickly for ideas. It's time now in a survival mode to talk to customers. It's about not talking to customers about, will you fly? Because they'll probably say no, because the borders aren't open. But it's about talking. It's about getting insights, information from your potential customers. It's about talking with your own people, the people that represent your company. How are we? What's happening? It's about trying to show strength together, that there is some vision that we need to move towards, but don't just give up. It's very easy in a survival mode to say, park aircraft. No point, no market, let's stop. Maybe the future says, if this continues, and coming back to the question, how long may this go on? There may be a question that says, if this doesn't pick up by 2021 summer, maybe it is time to then say, it may be less expensive to park the aircraft than to try to fly aircraft with low demand. But at this stage, it's trying to look for some small wins, quick wins. And maybe the industry has not been able to develop micromanagement. And that, as I've said, there's no textbook that talks about managing micro, because it's like what I said with Blue Ocean. It's not how the business world has been developed. We've developed long-term vision, thinking ahead. We've not thought about tomorrow. Tomorrow's just arriving, but maybe tomorrow is actually how we survive. Can we have quick win approaches? And of course, whilst passengers are moving in a survival mode, how do airlines adapt to respond to customer segmentation, where you may be booking within narrow, what we call very narrow windows, to try to support that? So survival is about being nimble. It's about trying to find little pieces of food or drink that will allow you to live another day. And I think that's where we are today, how to survive. The money's been given. We've kind of reallocated in a lot of airlines. They've reallocated their space. They've tried to understand what should be their level of potential capacity. Maybe time to have a look again about where we are. So that's the first R, this idea of resolving the situation. At some point, we need to return. I'm showing here build. How do we start to rebuild our industry? How do we want to rebuild our industry? What do we want to do at the other side of the crisis? What we call scenario planning, not scenario for survival, but where do we want to be in the next 2 to 5 years? Knowing that the next year is survival, is year 2 survival? We hope not. We hope not. Year 2 is about growing. Year 1 is, so we're going to go from survival to building overnight. Let's be honest, as soon as that vaccine is ready, there'll be a tsunami of people traveling. And we need to be ready for that. So whilst we're in a survival mode and thinking about nimble and small wins, at some point, we've got to knock that back and say, where do we go next? Because it's not in the interest of an airline to survive. It's not in the interest of a human to survive. We all have a purpose. There was always an expression that said, you know, what do you want on your tombstone? I made budget. In the business world, no. Self-actualization, Maslow, the hierarchy of needs. We reach a pinnacle. It doesn't have to be financial, but it's about rewarding yourself and actually realizing that you achieved something that made you feel good. That's what we have to think about now as we go into a build strategy. How do we ramp up our operations? Where can we look for those quick wins? But as I said before, what do we want to look like? Do we want to go back to 2019 and do exactly the same thing with potentially less people, less aircraft? Because let's be honest, in many cases, it's very hard to say this, but there's a lot less aircraft at the moment. There potentially might be a lot less people working in our industry. But we want to go back to where we came from with less? Well, it's impossible. You're going to make people do more. Yeah, there is a lovely expression, less is more, but this is the other way around. This is get people to do more and give them less. Well, they're not going to stand for that. So, and that's not going to be objective. So I think we've got to start to say, how do we want to look when we rebuild? And that, for a lot of companies, be it airlines, any industry, that's something we know. Again, you don't go to business school to think about redesigning what you do, because that would say that what you were doing was wrong. And of course, maybe some industries, if you look at the car manufacturing industry, what happened in the United States with Detroit is exactly that. Detroit died because they didn't realize what the Japanese were doing with car manufacturing. They kept making what they thought were great cars. But there was another part of the world that was making cars that were probably the same, but a lot cheaper. And Detroit died, and the car manufacturing went east. And America is now trying to bring it back in partnerships with the East. How do we see that with airlines? How do we look at where we go to and where we've come from? Maybe it's a big change in what we do, but this is all part of the rebuilding the industry. We need to look at and use information. We need data. We need to look at segmentation. Where do we want to be? Which routes, which markets, which consumers? In the past, it was everybody. You know, it was this kind of vision of aviation is the world. The aviation of the future may be much more targeted, segmented. How do you play a role in a different segment than the rest? On a masterclass a few months ago, I mentioned differentiation and cost leadership. The challenge now is, how do you differentiate in the new normal? What do you want to differentiate on? And maybe that differentiation is less is more. Maybe that's where you could start to think differently. Will customers be the same? Will there be more younger customers, older customers? Who knows? There was a mix of travel in 2019. Older people were traveling as well. Younger people were traveling. Will there be some changes in segmentation? How will people book? We're now, in the past, we booked months in advance. Now we're booking very close to travel. Will habits change? These are all where we need to work with some sort of qualitative and quantitative data. We need to talk to people, we need to be involved in understanding the psychographics of how people might act in the future. And so what I'm highlighting in this build strategy is know what you want to do. Go from survival to restoring and returning. It could be literally overnight. Be ready for that. So whilst you're surviving now, be planning the return. But what is the return? Please don't think the return is where we were. Try to think about what is the new way of returning. How do we want to look 2022 and beyond, and be ready, because it's not far from a return strategy. This will go away and we'll look back, but it's what has it changed is what I mentioned very earlier about adversity. Adversity is a short challenge that businesses reassess where they are. Potentially, this is a game changer for travel. It's a game changer for technology. And what impact will it have on our industry? We don't know. So rather than try to predict where the consumer might go, why don't we come up with ideas where we take the consumer with us, anticipate and drive, which is what we say with innovation. Move the needle. Don't go back to where we were with less. Go forward with not knowing what it might be, but be confident that we're ready to be that airline of the future. And the third R, before we take a final on a pause, is how might we look now at taking this to the next level? How do we anticipate the future? Because at some point, you know, we were talking about master planning. I'm sure many airlines were talking about orders up to 2025 and beyond 2025. So we've done that scenario planning. countries talk about 2030. Tourism boards talk about 2030. Do we need to relook at our 10-year planning and really understand what does that mean? Because being stronger is being closer to the challenge. By really engaging in that rebuild, you can try to anticipate what you want next. How do we try to think about the future? Is it going to be cheap travel? Do we want to move that analogy? Cheap travel is not as gone. You know, do we think that people will travel in the future because it's cheap? Depends again about how those segments will change, ways people work, what will happen with pricing, revenue management for those of that work in pricing. The revenue management system is algorithm based on what happened in the past, coming back to Blue Ocean. Revenue management and Blue Ocean don't go together because Blue Ocean says, I've no idea what the price is. And what we talked about on that masterclass a few months back was something called value pricing. How much is it worth? Because revenue management just looks at what people are paid over algorithms in the last month, 2 months, 6 months, 1 year, on a Sunday, on a Monday, at 5 o'clock, at 3 o'clock. Ah, bingo, that's what we should charge. Well, we don't know now. We have no idea what people will pay to travel. No idea. So we can't go back to the algorithms. I've no idea what revenue management will look like in the new normal, but what we think about is value. How much will people pay? And if we force people back to pay low prices because we have no differentiation and we all sell in the same space, then maybe we go back to what we were doing. But the reality would say in this stage of reforming, it's going to be a smart company that starts to say, what is the new revenue system? How do we price in the future? Because I can't price with what I've done in the past because the market's now changed. So the algorithms are completely destroyed. So we need new algorithms to replace the algorithms that have been developed, or do we need to define through anthropology? Let's get anthropologists to review what the future might look like and how we can convince consumers the ability to pay is value rather than price. Again, something we've covered in the previous. So, and the other question is, we also look at our competitors. Well, why would we look at our competitors? They're looking at us. They don't know what to do either. So in the good old days, there was this strategy, well, if we can't beat them, join them. So let's charge what they charge because they've done it for longer than we have, but they don't know what to do. So you can't really look at your competitors at the moment and say, well, let's take their ideas because they don't know either. So the whole world now says, hey, you're on your own. You're on your own, which maybe is not a bad thing. Maybe there's been too much, what I use this expression of similarity, parity. And I got in trouble because I used an analogy of toothpaste relative to aviation. And I think I said the amount of innovation that goes, if you talk to Procter & Gamble, Unilever, the people that make toothpaste, and you talk to them about innovation, about the ability to work with qualitative data, and then you talk to an airline, I tell you now, Procter & Gamble, Unilever, have far more intelligence about customer habits and insights than aviation. So maybe the toothpaste is not a bad competitor to look at, not the competitor being the toothpaste, but maybe we should study Procter & Gamble, because how do they innovate? And we call that benchmarking with outside our sector. We used to do benchmarking in the 80s and the 90s. If you went to business school in the 90s, benchmarking was the buzzword. Okay, it was a nice way to try to get money from your existing company to spend time with other companies. Can I go and spend a day working in a bank? Because I want to understand relationships. I work in an airline. How do banks form relationships with their customers? Can we learn from the bank? Supermarkets, whoa, they were really good. I remember years ago with the guys from Tesco. Tesco was a UK, then it went to US, it went to Asia. They were the biggest supermarket group in Europe at one point in terms of turnover. And there was a wonderful case study of how Tesco grew in relation to anticipation. There was a consultancy made a pitch to the CEO of Tesco about loyalty management. This is 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, when Tesco was developing what they went on to call Club Card. And this consultancy went to Tesco and presented to a company that had been retailing for over 100 years about selling. They knew everything about their customers because they were retailers. And this consultancy spent 30 minutes explaining to Tesco what you could do if you had some data about those people. And they presented this strategy to the CEO, and the room went silent. The room went silent, and the consultant, it's a case study. If you Google Tesco loyalty club card, the consultant went quiet. And it's that time when if you've ever been in that position, when you're trying to sell somebody something and they go quiet, you think, ooh, they didn't like it. But the quietness was not that he didn't like it, because the response was, wow, what you've just told me in 30 minutes is more than anybody has ever told me in the 30, 40 years that I've been in this industry and 100 years that this company has been running. This is the future of how this segment will move. And the relationship marketing that supermarkets got into was pioneering. It put the airline loyalty program to shame, How airlines were using loyalty was based upon colors of credit cards to make people look good if they had gold on the side of their briefcase when they went to the airport. What Tesco was able to do was to make one very important analysis: what you buy and when you buy it and how often you buy it. For those of you who've studied segment or studied marketing, we talk about geographic segmentation, where you segment on where people live. Does Ghana have a difference than Portugal? So do we need different clothes because your weather is warmer than ours? That's geographic segmentation. It's simple. Does the North and the South have a difference? And then there was something called behavioral segmentation, usage, patterns. No, people didn't think much about it because we moved to this, what we called psychographic segmentation, lifestyle, how you would like to be, the 90s, the buzz of the 90s. And what supermarkets said is, that's very nice to know about what TV station you watch, but it doesn't really make you buy a product. What actually is more interesting is to know what you buy. And interestingly, what the supermarket was able to do, and this is, some people, if you look at Walmart, Tesco, and you look at where they were really at the end of the 90s when relationship marketing was at its most interesting, Tesco created a credit card, a Visa card. So half the population of the United Kingdom was a member of Tesco's Club Card. Not necessarily that meant that half the population shopped in Tesco, but they had a relationship with around 20 million potential customers. And then so they know when you go in, what you buy. And when you shop, generally there's a belief that who you are. Yeah, maybe you have some exotic purchases, but there's a routine of what you buy. And what Tesco was able to do was create a credit card. So when you shopped in Tesco, they monitored you with the club card. When you went and shopped out of Tesco, you used a Tesco credit card. So when I went to shop in another supermarket, Tesco knew what I was buying, and I wasn't buying it in their shop. Maybe because they didn't sell it. And if you think what this went on to was that Tesco became one of the biggest sellers of televisions in a supermarket, because they could monitor where people were buying televisions, electrical goods, and they put those in their shop because they used the data from the credit card to build the vision for the shops. And they used the information from the shops to know what they were not selling to bring into the shops. So the anticipation on the way you use relationships and data is unbelievable. And the supermarket. So what I'm talking about here is benchmarking. We need to go and look at the best. We need to define who is the best in different categories and see how we learn from that. That's about anticipating. We need to go back. We can't look at competitors because we don't know where they are. And the vision is about moving forward. How do we try to understand? I will stop there, and I will then hand back to Elizabeth. And then I'll make a final conclusion slide. But Elizabeth, can we take a few minutes just to, I'm going to stop sharing because I'm going to bring a different slide to finalize the event. But are there any questions that I've not been able to answer? And then we will go back to the last slide for the wrap up.
Okay, thank you.
If you could.
So we have some comments in the chat box from John Backcroft.
Okay.
From Solving Future Visions, Gavin. Great
Okay.
discourse for shifting values to respond.
Can I access the chat?
Yes.
Okay. So
great
we're talking
discourse for shifting values to respond and create aviation future. Thank you. And then we have a question from Andrew. He's saying, what is the difference between COVID pandemic affecting various industry players and airlines facing bankruptcy and reorganization? Is there any chance of survival for the industry players?
Well, I think, thank you again, Andrew, for your, I think the easy answer is, yeah, that you know, the governments did what they could do. You know, you're looking at some governments were bailing out to as much as 8 billion euros. You've seen how much the US has given with the CARES Act in the last 4 or 5 months. The worry now is if that money is being used to understand the last months, as you say, of or what I was highlighting to you earlier about not knowing the end of this pandemic. Unfortunately, your question is absolutely valid. That, you know, not everybody will survive for sure, because there was a lot of concerns that in some cases, was it worth bailing out airlines that were already losing money? And there were some governments have created a sense of, if you do receive money from us, you have to change some of your strategy. So you saw that with some airlines being told, you know, you have to focus more on longer flights than shorter flights. The shorter flights should be covered by other transport methodologies. So I think, you know, there had been a belief that many airlines were given support and that was enough. And now the market would kick back and the airlines would go back to their day-to-day thinking. It's hard to say because of rightly that we don't see the next 6 months with a huge euphoria, unfortunately, in terms of supporting an airline not to be making significant cash burn. So that then says is, of course, what will be the next phase? And I think, of course, it's not just our industry. If you look at the retail sector, the food and beverage sector, they're suffering as well, because obviously, unless you can try to shift quickly to domestic, which is what we're going to mention tomorrow, of course, and Elizabeth has put that on the table, because it's a quick fix. That if you can get people to stay in hotels and go to restaurants, you keep the local economy, and encouraging people to go back to work. They go to they use the local shops. So I think there's been a little bit of trying to help, but unless, being honest, an airline that's not really focused on domestic, or doesn't have a dimension of domestic strong enough, it's not going to be. I think there might be further requests for funding, and how will that look in the eyes of the stakeholders? I can't answer that at this stage, but I think we were hoping that Christmas monies would have been given. We might have something else coming through 21, but we can get by. We can survive. Who knows? Thank you for your questions again. Anything else, Elizabeth? Then I'll bring back my last slide then, and then we'll close, if that's okay with your timing. I have about 5 more minutes. Is that all right?
Okay. We have some comments
from takeaways.
Okay, Gavin, so we are streaming live on Facebook, and we have some comments coming from there. From Kofi Chalele, he says, good point.
Oh, okay.
Then from Samuel Yaufusu, he says, I love this trainer.
Okay, thank you.
Very knowledgeable. So you're being appreciated throughout.
There we go.
Yes, you're being appreciated throughout for the trading.
There we go. Okay, so just my last couple of takeaways so from here to there, the grass, we have this lovely expression, the grass is always greener on the other side. And we hope so. When that grass will be green again, we don't know. But how might we make the grass green? I think put the people first, the people being your employees and your customers. Talk to them. I think it is a good time to, in this survival stage, it's about dialogue. Maybe in 2019, we were so busy, we forgot to talk to our customers. And I don't like to keep throwing anecdotes, but there's a most amazing case study from, there's an airline, it's no longer with us, called Continental. It's now United. They were bought by United. They had a CEO by the name of Gordon Bethune, and he wrote a book about how he turned Continental Airlines around. And they used the anecdote of the Last Supper. And the Last Supper was the CEO and the board members of Continental got together and said, tomorrow we close. Tomorrow the company's finished. And they drank and they talked and they said, do you know what we need tomorrow? We actually need to ask the customer what we could do better. Because we were good. We were really good at one point, but now we're not good. So we can shut down tomorrow, or we can actually go back and ask the customer in seat 12A, 1C, 22D, you pick the numbers of seats you have, go and talk to them. And the whole turnaround of from worst to first, as they called their strategy, was about talking to customers, about what we did well and what we're not doing well now. And if we can learn from what we did and try and do it again, maybe we can try to put people first. And it's a good time, not to say what we would do, oh, weren't we great in 2019? No, what we were doing in 2019, what can we take from that to build into this strategy of 21 and beyond? Put people in your vision. And that's the ability of qualitative research. You know, I'm from the academic school where studies on the ability to not know the answer is more important. There's a big debate in the professor's world between qualitative and quantitative methodologies. There's a belief that a PhD says you studied to provide an answer, yes, no. And you do a hypothesis to prove something that says if you do something, there will be some sort of return. And the university world and the business world and many of the ways of our thinking have been around statistics and this idea that it's yes, no. And I told you before about the likes of Procter & Gamble and Unilever and these, what we now call fast-moving consumer goods, FMCG companies. They believe in the power of insight, and insight is qualitative data. There's research from the 1950s on psychology that talk about grounded theory. This is a research methodology. Grounded theory is the concept where I've no idea what my answer will be. I find my answer from doing the study. You talk about the deduction of the solution. You deduct the solution from analyzing the problem. That's not a hypothesis. And some people don't believe in this. There are a lot of academics that say qualitative analysis, qualitative data is subjective. It's not real. But in the world of consumers and the world of experiences, maybe it's time to focus on qualitative data. Talk to your people. Adapt the qualitative data to the consumer shifts. As I talked about Procter & Gamble, Unilever, studying why things happen. Anthropology. Anthropology is the study of why. There are companies in these FMCG groups that have a professor of anthropology that advises the board of directors. Anthropology tries to understand why. And maybe in the new world, we need to understand why, not where we've been. We need to leverage loyalty. I gave you the example of the supermarkets, the relationship building that you can take from studying insights and building cross projects. Reimagine partners, work with others. Don't do this on your own. We have the concept of synergy. Synergy says that the whole is greater than its parts. Provide business relationships with others. Maybe we get together with our competitors. As I said in my early discussion, competitors are looking at you and you're looking at competitors and you both say, what the hell do we do? Well, let's maybe think about two heads are better than one. And we've got to protect the brand. Protect the brand. What I mean by this is realize that where we were should not be where we want to go and say. We have to realize that the world is evolving and the world is adapting and the world is changing. Let's not be arrogant. Brands were a little bit arrogant in the millennial 20s, etc. Maybe it's time to remove some of the arrogance of a brand and be a little bit more qualitative in the way we present. So that was what I wanted to say. I think I will use this last. Fortune favors the bold. This is not blind optimism. This is not saying, oh, forget what's happened 2021, 2022, let's go back and restart. No, look at what's happened in 19. Look at what's happened now. Don't give up, but fortune favors those that take a different opinion and go forward. So thank you very much. Hope to see some of you tomorrow. I'll be back tomorrow to help Elizabeth with the development of Ghana's domestic approach. And we had talked a lot, Elizabeth, about trying to do some work to bring some vision and more experience to the aviation world in Ghana. So we're happy to try to help. And any feedback, please pass it on to Elizabeth, and we'll continue to understand the needs of your great market. So thank you. Good morning for you now. Good afternoon for me. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Gavin. This was such a wonderful training, and I believe our panelists and attendees have learned something from it. So we have, hello, Albert.
Hello, madam.
Yes, Albert has raised his hands, and he wants to contribute or ask a question. Albert, you are permitted to speak, please. Hello, Albert.
Hi, Albert.
Hello. Hello, Albert.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, my problem is his voice was very low.
Oh, okay. All right, no problem. It's being recorded and it will be shared as and when. So please stay tuned. When it's shared via our YouTube channel, you can watch it again.
Okay.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you too. You're welcome.
We have some comments in the chat box. From Richard Schre, he says great. From Albert, he says good. And then from Lady Vera, she says very insightful session. Thank you, Gavin. More qualitative approach. From Edward Hunu, he says great piece. And then from John Howell, he says brilliant as always, Gavin. So the comments are good, and our participants on Facebook, yes, and our participants on Facebook Live are also happy with the training. So we have very insightful from Albertine Allen. And she said, I guess I have missed a lot, meaning she joined not too long ago. Samuel Yafosu says, I love this trainer, very knowledgeable. And then Kofi Chalele says, good point. Thank you, Gavin, for this training. You've been so wonderful.
The checks are in the post to those who've given the comment.
You've been wonderful. Okay.
Thank you.
Please,
see you tomorrow.
Please, do you have any more questions to ask Gavin or any contributions towards this session? If you have any contribution or chats or questions, kindly put it in the Q&A or chat box, or you can raise your hand and you'll be called. We have just 2 minutes. Okay, from Idris. Idris Batel, welcome to the Aviator Conference. You are permitted to talk, your contribution or question. Idris Bapetel, you are permitted to speak, please.
I think he needs to be unmute.
Yes, he's unmuted.
Now he's okay. Now he should be able to talk now.
Hello, Idris. Hello, Idris. I think he's having network issues. Hello, Idris.
Yeah, network me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Hello, can you hear me? My network is very bad. Can you hear me now?
Yes, loud and clear, please.
Okay, yeah, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Hello. Yeah, can you hear me now? Yeah, good morning. My name is Idris Bapetel from Abuja, Nigeria. Yeah, I would like to summarize on the tourism and hospitality industry in brief. Like, even though like I'm a new member, also I just started my travel and tourism here in Abuja. So I will like to talk about hospitality. As you all know, hospitality is one of the fastest growing industry in the world. So today we have different hotels, events and tourism centers, luxury service, food and services. Are you with me?
Yes, Idris, we are with you.
Hello.
Hello, Idris, we are with you. Yes,
yeah,
we are.
I think he's talking about the hotels, correct, Idris?
Yeah. So the biggest trend coming to hospitality industry. All right. All right. Yes, I'm talking about hotel, that's hospitality.
Yes. Of course, you're suffering like the aviation industry because people are not traveling. But I think the hotel...
The biggest trend in hospitality industry are global perspective, finding the balance of new learning options.
Yes, of course. If there are no borders, if the borders are closed, it's stopping international travel. And as you say, airlines and hotels are suffering in the same way because
like people are not traveling.
Of course. I think what's interesting is that tomorrow we will spend. I don't know the other panels, but my panel tomorrow, Idris, is going to show how some of the other countries in the world have developed a domestic project, because some hotels now are making business because of the domestic needs. If we look at China, hotels in China have got 70–80% occupancy because people can travel. Now, if there are cases, I think you said you were calling in from Nigeria. If there is a movement in Nigeria by the government to push a domestic project, like we'll show tomorrow with France, Spain, Portugal, North America, there's been a lot of work from the government to really incentivize the travelers in that country to go to your hotels through discounting, through vouchers. There's even some hotels now encouraging people to go to the hotels rather than stay home. There are some people say use a hotel as an office because you've got office space, you've got bedrooms, and there is a lot of projects to try to get hotels with the local community, with the domestic tourist. As you say, whilst you don't have the borders, it's not easy. And I think some we'll look tomorrow over this, but there are some really good case studies of what the hotels are doing to try to work with the government to say, hey, can we, if a Nigerian comes to stay in my hotel, can they have a voucher? Let's say 30%, 40% discount. The government will support that because if it keeps your hotels open, it keeps you working. So the government makes the money from the people who are employed. So there's a lot of incentives that are being given to travelers, domestic travelers, so people from your own country coming to your own hotels because they can keep them open. Whilst the international travelers don't come, think about the domestic. And that's what I think Elizabeth knows more than me because she's developed it, but tomorrow there's a lot of panels that will talk about domestic. And maybe for you in Nigeria, there's a lot of learning for tomorrow.
Hello, Gavin. Are you done answering his question?
Yes, I'm done. I think I told him, please come back tomorrow. It'll be good because the domestic tomorrow is important. But I need to say goodbye, if that's okay, Elizabeth. I need to leave.